Right, I think that's enough messing around with the horn. Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Canadian National Oakville Subdivision route. This is one that I haven't covered in quite a long time actually, partly because I'm not really sure what else to or what to do on it. But today we're just going for a short drive from here at Oakville to the freight yards at Burlington. And our engine is the EMD GP9RM, which of course I dare say some of you will probably be familiar with the classic GP9, and of course traditionally the GP9s have got a high nose that is more or less the same height as the long hood, but these rebuilt engines obviously had the nose cut down. Up front it still doesn't really look that much like a GP9RM or an original GP9, but around the back it certainly does. Quite coincidentally, this one's got the same number as one of KiwiRail's DC locomotives, specifically DC 4156. Although unfortunately 4156 hasn't been in service for quite a long time. Right, I think I've got this thing set up properly. Let's just try to move this thing. Unfortunately, the sounds on this thing are pretty bad, especially if this horn is anything to go by. That is one of the most generic horn sounds one could ever hear, and I remember I heard it so many times, like back in the days of some of the older Train Sim Z games, and you'd hear Dovetail in their finite wisdom using the same tired old horn sound in TSW, and as if that wasn't bad enough, they used it on both the diesels that come with this Oakville Subdivision route. The other one we might see later is the GP38-2. This should be a fairly easy run towards Burlington today because we've only got 5 wagons. I should add that this is currently the only Canadian route in TSW, which is quite disappointing because for the most part it is just a flat and level route running along generally dead straight 3-track main line, and it's like one of the most boring and linear routes you can imagine. And the only notable thing about it is that it is Canadian and includes 2 CN diesels. It just seems very underwhelming for the first Canadian route, and conveniently there have not been any others in this country since this one. Perhaps Dovetail thought poor reactions and sales to this one were enough to make them scared doing more Canadian routes. Although I reckon that if they actually did do more Canadian routes, that would probably get more popular, especially if it was something like. Actually, I'm trying to think. Well, perhaps more of the Go Transit network or commuter lines around Montreal. Actually, that would be more interesting, the lines around Montreal, because then you could include like the MR90 electric multiple units, as well as the Bombardier ALP 45DP and multi-level cars. I think it used to be called AMT in Montreal, but now I think they call it EXO. Either way, but yeah, that would just realise that commuter network around Montreal would certainly be quite interesting to see in TSW, especially with the ALP 45DP, because that's an electro diesel. And apologies for these long and awkward silences, but I'm also trying to eat my breakfast while driving this Canadian diesel. And if these ticket machines weren't an obvious enough indication, this is a GO Transit station, which begs the question: where are the MP40s and bi-level cars? Why, Dovetail? Why did you not bother adding any of them? And I mean, it's probably to do with like the cowardly licensing restrictions. But even so, it's like the fact that there's no GO Transit trains on here doesn't help when you're trying. It doesn't help this idea of trying to make the route look really like realistically busy. And if you want to see a realistically busy route in TSW, try something like London Commuter or Norfolk and Dresden. Those ones are actually where Dovetail have bothered to take a bit more time to incorporate an awful lot of AI services. But in this case, the route honestly feels so lifeless and boring. It would give Great Western Express a run for its money. And in all seriousness, I think Great Western Express is one of the worst routes in TSW. Although actually not as bad as when you think of it. As much as I don't like GWE, it's not as bad as Long Island Railroad. But, despite the lack of GO Transit services, this Oakville Subdivision is still not too bad of a route to drive on. I mean, it's good for those who like driving North American freight trains, but not like the crazy long ones along steeply graded routes, like Clinchfield or Sandpatch grade. And you can still get up to a decent speed along here because the speed limit's 60 miles an hour. And yeah, there's I did mention earlier that you also get the GP38-2s with the routes, and here they are. Now those engines have got like some specific alterations to the model that you don't see on you don't get on like the CSX or Union Pacific variants. And whilst it is somewhat boring that Dovetail decided to include the GP38s again, at the very least, each of the three variants of this thing that we've got in the game, that is to say CSX, Union Pacific and CN, they've all got distinct detail differences between each other, so that they don't look exactly the same. Looks like we're coming up on another GO Transit station. This one's Bronte. I think I used to know someone. Well, there was someone at school, from my last school, whose surname was Bronte, and she was apparently quite popular with the other people in the same year level as me, and yet I was never mates with her. Go figure! Yeah, but this isn't the time, and this isn't the right sort of place to let me interpret your mistakes at school. I don't just mean mistakes in terms of like the actual education, but also mistakes in terms of classwork, but mainly mistakes in terms of our social life. Now here's something that, of course, that real drivers would never do. Leave the seat and then walk around the cab all willy-nilly while the engine's moving. And while the throttle is still engaged and all. I don't know exactly how long we've got to go before we get to Burlington, but I'm pretty sure. I mean, it said when it was giving you the option to choose from like a list of timetable mode services, it does at least show you how long it should take to complete each service. And in this case, it said it was only about 15 minutes. Geez, that water looks filthy. course, as I've never been to the Toronto area in real life, or Oakville or Hamilton or whatever part of Canada this is, I don't know, I can't comment on how accurate the details are in real life, or like how accurate this route TSW is compared to real life. One thing I can comment on is, surely there'd be vehicles going up and down these roads. Like, it just looks, again, as I said earlier, it's just that most of the time this route just looks so unrealistically quiet. Crossing, and this one's totally dead as well, which is actually quite shocking considering it's a dual carriage, it appears to be a dual carriageway. There's what looks like a baseball pitch, 2 baseball pitches at least, idle throttle for the time being. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that baseball was a thing in Canada, but I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, it goes to show you how much I know about the country, and the answer is not much. Anyway, coming up on another station now, and this one is Appleby. Not to be confused with the station of the same name on the Cecil Carlisle line in England. The station doesn't look too bad with these very light blue canopies. Yeah, 4 miles to Burlington. Well, the triangle. There's these. Now, I'm pretty sure I didn't need to install any like mods or any like texture patches, because I think these ticket machines look exactly like this straight out the box. And these 2 green circles, to me, that looks like a vanilla Go Transit logo, and they've of course got the words in both English and French by the looks of it. And yeah, I was just mentioning Montreal earlier, and that's in Quebec, where the French Canadians, and Quebec is the province that's mainly home to French Canadians. I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure there is like some sound mod out there that actually makes the GP9RM and GP38-2 sound bearable, in all seriousness, because these engine sounds, like the idling and notching up and what have you, to me they sound exactly the same as the like Southern Pacific GP9 and Denver and Rio Grande Western SD9 that you get in the old train simulator. The horn is different from those two, but it's still that same horrible sound that you heard in just about every freeware trains with the Z locomotive. It's like, how could Dovetail have thought that it was okay to reuse this incredibly boring and generic horn sound? Like, surely GP9RMs wouldn't have a horn that sounded anywhere near close to that in real life. You can see the horns there on top of on the roof, just behind that fan, which doesn't appear to be spinning. That's cool. Curious how the bell is mounted on. Oh crap. Just realised I noticed that 15 mile an hour speed limit far too late. Although saying that, the engine looks like it's got pretty good brakes. That's take much less time to release than I thought they would. I was thinking it would be like the Norfolk Southern ES44ACs that you get in Train Simulator, where, like on the Norfolk Southern Coal District route, where the brakes take an incredibly long time to release. Which isn't really a good thing when you're trying to maintain speed like 25 miles an hour and you're going downhill. Yeah, Norfolk Southern Coal District is one of those routes that I don't really drive on all that often, if at all. Partly because of those speed limits. I generally don't like crawling along no faster than 25 miles an hour. And that's why I prefer a route like Oakville Subdivision here, because whilst it's got a lot of problems, it does at least allow you to get up to a pretty decent speed, if you consider 60 miles an hour as decently fast. I mean, I think in the UK, their speed limit, like for reference, in the UK I believe the speed limit on the motorways is something like 70 or 75 miles an hour. And then the trains, a lot of the trains in the UK can generally get up to 75 miles an hour, or some of them, like the Class 158, can go all the way to 90. And then a lot of EMUs, like the Class 700, for example, that can get all the way up to 100, at the very least. The 350s, on the other hand, some of them can do 110. Yeah, this said, well, pretty much goes without saying that in a lot of cases taking a train is a lot faster than going by car. Yeah, so as we're getting close to Burlington, I just figured I might as well ask any of you watching, like, what do you think of this Oakville Subdivision route? Like, have you actually got it for yourselves? And if you do you think is it good to drive on, or do you think it's good to drive on? Because I can't remember how long I've had it for. Yeah, from what I've seen of it, it's despite its problems, it's the sort of route that I can willingly come back to and drive on it every now and then. There are some routes where you generally don't come back to it all that often, like Long Island Railroad, Great Western Express, basically all those really old and horrible ones. I'm trying to think of another modern. Hauptstrecke München to Augsburg. That's another route that I generally don't like to drive on, because for some reason there are bits of that route where the overhead wires are missing. Like Dovetail, how the hell could you let such a blatant and glaring issue slip through the cracks and end up in the final product? Like, there's no excuse for that sort of thing. Like, you see the missing wires at like München Donnersberger Brücke and München Passing, and it's just ridiculous. And it's generally, I think it is just that one route where I've seen such an absurd amount of missing overhead wires. Mind you, there should be absolutely no bits of overhead wires missing at all. Of course, that's not a problem on routes like Oakville Subdivision, where, as you can clearly tell, it's not electrified. Saying that, I wonder what it would look like if Go Transit was electrified. Although, from what I've seen on the RM Transit YouTube channel, it looks like there's a major infrastructure project going on here in Toronto to significantly enhance the Go Transit service. But I'm not really going to comment on it because I don't know anything about what's going on. But that station we passed through, I think that was Burlington. Yeah, I don't particularly like the basic nature of these stations, where there's just these low-level platforms and generic shelters and things. I think there's a ticket. There's No, those aren't ticket machines, but these are just like generic. These are generic shelter models that I've seen far too often throughout TSW. And I think you can even see this exact same type at like Southease on the Seaford branch of the East Coastway line, which is an incredibly relaxed environment compared to like a Canadian commuter service out of Toronto, which is certainly not some roadside hick town like, oh, I don't know, Palmerston North or Martin. If any of you or any New Zealanders watching will probably realise that, or hopefully realise I'm just taking the piss there. I say like roadside hick towns, I'm mainly referring to like really tiny rural settlements. I'm trying to think if there's any places well, there's a load of places in Canada that would be tiny rural settlements, but I just don't know which ones they are. One thing I do know about Canada and their geography is that generally it's only the southern half of the country where you get major population centres like Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, etc, etc, etc. Generally just those areas that are close to the border with the US, because up north there's next to nothing, and that took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but regardless, that would look outside for this one, I think. But regardless, yeah, this has been just a quick little run along the Oakville Subdivision routes with the EMD GP9RM. And yeah, I do hope that you've enjoyed it, despite the awful horn sound this thing's got. And yeah, before I go, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching, and I invite you to check out my other TSW videos through the playlist of the same name. Yeah, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.